This week on the Nonprofit News Feed, of course, brought to you by Whole Whale, a B Corp digital agency focused on marketing and analytics. My name is George Weiner. I'm the chief whaler of Whole Whale, and we have Nick Azule. Nick, how's it going?
It's going great, George. Another week in our fine universe.
We're
It
doing it.
feels like we're doing it. We're in it. George, we want to take a little bit of a pivot from the insanity of our 24-hour news cycle and take a little bit of a more big picture approach to a narrative that I know that you've been pulling and I think is helpful for us as social impact marketing professionals. And George, you're creating a meta narrative about understanding how corporations are kind of deflecting blame from and responsibility from themselves onto us, the consumer. And I think in this case, we want to talk about the corporate capture of the carbon footprint. You wrote a piece for nonprofitnewsfeed.com recently, and you describe this, you reveal this shocking fact that the term carbon footprint, the one we thought to obsess over, we harassed Taylor Swift over, and apparently that wasn't invented by climate activists or environmental researchers. It was invented by British Petroleum. BP, one of the world's largest oil companies, that coined and promoted that term as part of a $200 million PR campaign throughout the early 2000s. And their goal wasn't to save the planet, it was to save themselves from regulation and public scrutiny. Now, George, if we rewind back to 2000s, we have a carbon footprint. We have Al Gore telling us, probably rightly, sounding the alarm about global warming and climate change. But George, what did this mean for the consumer? How did this reframe the debate in ways that were ultimately potentially toxic?
I think you caught it in that very moment where you explained that we got on Taylor Swift for her carbon footprint. Think about that for a moment. We're going after a pop superstar who's just, bringing sunshine and smiles wherever she goes, doing disproportionate amount of upside to the local communities that she gets to, mind you. We're attacking her for her carbon footprint. Carbon footprint, a PR concept created by Ogilvy and Mather to deflect systemic abuse of the environment and push it onto the individual. This ties into this concept that we've been really thinking about and reflecting on for some time, but guilt washing. You've heard of greenwashing. This isn't greenwashing. We kind of need new terms, is what I've come to realize. We need new terms to understand the level and, frankly, genuine intelligence of recrafting systemic abuses of the environment, of the social constructs to the individual. And so in guilt washing, you should feel guilty because you know why? You don't have a hybrid car. You should feel guilty because you used a plastic bag. You should feel guilty because you used a plastic straw. You should feel guilty. Now, here's the funny thing. Hypothetically, let's just say carbon footprint, it is your fault, right? It is your fault. What if we ran a massive experiment where we got everyone in the world to literally completely reduce the driving and the travel? What if we did that? Could you imagine if we ran that experiment? We did. It was called COVID. We literally did that. And the collective work of the 8+ billion people doing so much significantly less did little but a blip in the overall impact of carbon into the world. And that's because there's about 100 companies that are responsible for the majority of carbon being pumped into the world, taken out in forms of dead dinosaurs and shoved into the atmosphere. So pause for a second, as we just passed Earth Day, and think about when you see an advertisement, something that pushes responsibility onto the individual, which still matters. Genuinely, you should care about your path through the world. And by the way, but prior to carbon footprint, they took it from somebody who actually went a lot deeper, to give them credit, William Rees, and the ecological footprint. And that was in the early 90s, which was much more holistic. That is worth looking at. You are a citizen. But just as no single snowflake is responsible for the avalanche, we have to look at the systemic causes. So that is something of when you look closely and when you put on those type of glasses and are looking at some of these historical moments, I'm trying to continue to revisit them because I think there's a lot to be gleaned here and a way for us to potentially inoculate the next generation of carbon footprinting of guilt washing, of what we're calling the deflection marketing tactics used to push systemic bullshit and abuse onto the consumer.
Yeah, George, absolutely. And I think we can extrapolate this into so many different other venues, which I know we'll do. But a really timely analysis for Earth Day. And I think that kind of tees up our next story, George, which is, of course, on Monday, us here in America woke up to the news that Pope Francis has passed away. And I think it's actually appropriate that we talk about Pope Francis a little bit because Pope Francis was a tremendous advocate for the environment. He really focused on kind of like the ecological balance of humans' relationship to the environment. And George, get this, Pope Francis wrote an encyclical. It's kind of like an official church state document, right? It's a little, almost like a little novella. But it's really a treatise calling us as humans to protect the environment and in doing so uphold human dignity, human rights, and kind of reset our relationship with the environment. And it's cool, right? Because Pope Francis has a science background, right? So he goes into the carbon, he goes into the deforestation and like the nitty gritty of it. And he's like, listen, people, we're not doing enough. We're not doing nearly enough. He basically calls for an ecological revolution. And Pope Francis's words were cited 10 times by leaders advocating for the Paris Climate Accords. So this Pope Francis in some ways created kind of the moral momentum, or at least coalesced it into that landmark agreement. So just wanted to kind of shout out that the world lost, not going to opine on the other politics of church or Pope Francis, but the world lost, I think, a truly influential leader in pushing for climate justice globally, quite frankly.
Yeah, hopefully the framing stays in terms of, the role of stewards that we have in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting, George, because we're in a couple stories going to talk about giving in the United States. And we're going to learn that a lot of the giving goes actually to religious organizations, right? And I think sometimes those kind of fall outside the purview of kind of the standard mainstream debate about, charitable giving and movement building and that kind of thing. But I think it's worth acknowledging that religious organizations and movements do have sway. And I think it's important to kind of take that into stock when we think about how can we generate the most momentum for the most amount of people, particularly on an issue as global as climate justice. All right. And I can take us into our next one, George. And this one comes from NBC News. And George, I don't know if you've heard, but the Ice Bucket Challenge is back. So let me take you back to 2014. I was still in high school. And the Ice Bucket Challenge raised millions of dollars for ALS research, but now it's been repackaged. It was started by University of South Carolina, USC students as a part of the hashtag Speak Your Mind campaign to raise awareness for mental health issues. And the campaign is generating revenue for Active Minds, an awesome kind of youth-focused nonprofit organization focusing on the mental health needs of youth across the country. And George, this article was published on Friday. I just checked, and it's up to 300,000. So they raised 200K in the past, I guess, I don't know, 4 or 5 days. So they have momentum. They got Peyton Manning on their side, and the ALS Association, in some ways the beneficiaries of the first official Ice Bucket Challenge, has blessed the campaign, if you will, offered their goodwill. So cool to see kind of a viral challenge coming back for getting repurposed for a different cause. I think, George, it'd be malpractice for us as marketing practitioners to tell our clients, just do the Ice Bucket Challenge. But it appears that Active Minds kind of inadvertently, maybe somewhat strategically, was able to make this happen. So just kind of cool to see.
Well, I think my understanding of the story is that it definitely came again from youth. They have these local campuses, and it simply started as that challenge. And I think every year somebody tries to make fetch happen, and frankly, you had enough time go by where it became novel to enough people. As you mentioned, it's like over a decade ago now, so you have a whole new generation of people that weren't exposed to that, the novelty of it, and the virality components of it still work. I actually like the new iteration of Ice Bucket Challenge better with regard to the match to the cause, because I believe the byproduct of the activity is helpful to the cause. What does that mean? Talking about mental health, unpacking the conversations that could be happening on campuses, around campuses for students dealing with stress is actually healing, is actually helpful. And no offense to ALS, but us talking about it doesn't really do anything about it in the same way, as opposed to like write the check so you can do the research and hopefully move the needle. Absolutely. But I think the byproduct of the conversation around mental health, what it means, is very positive in this sense. I was like looking on Google Trends to be like, is this going to keep going? And we have a long way to go in terms of where it got in terms of zeitgeist in 2014, where it is probably 1/20th, I'd say, the share of attention that Ice Bucket previously had. That said, I'm just trying to like gauge, like, are we going up still? I'm a little nervous that like it's it is peaked. Like you need it to catch a bigger wave than it previously did. So yeah, I hope the ice doesn't melt too quickly on this, but I'm starting to see downward trends already.
I hear you, George. I think we're in that, right? Like the waves don't crest as high and last as long as they used to for seemingly anything. So, but just kind of a fun update there. All right, George, I want to take us into our next one. I mentioned it at the top, but the Associated Press has released a poll about charitable giving in the United States with some notable statistics worth taking a peek at. It reports that 75% of US adults reported donating to charitable organizations, though the overwhelming majority gave $500 or less, and religious organizations and basic needs groups received the most amount of that money. Younger Americans were more likely to report giving nothing to charity, regardless of income level. Millennials, Gen Z, what are we doing? Suggesting potential generational differences in attitudes towards charitable giving. 70% of Americans also donated food, clothing, and other kind of supplies to organizations. And overall, kind of like a mixed signal. I think organizations would be happy to see that 75% giving number, but probably less happy to kind of dive into the crosstabs and see that younger generations are probably a little bit more dissociated from the giving apparatus, and folks are kind of giving potentially less to more narrow causes.
Yeah, what they're branding here is the generosity crisis. In my mind, I was like, oh, younger Americans under 45, like, it's probably less wealth than ever before because of the financial strains on it. And they say even normalized for folks with the capacity to give are giving less, really tying back to the question of the generosity crisis. So it's now in the back of my mind now to look for other supporting data. I was looking through M&R benchmarks, and we'll comb through that, I think, next week after we pull some stats from it. And then the summer we get the USA Giving stats on what's going on and try to tie together this cohesive narrative. But you don't have to stretch too far to realize that if you've got an administration that is vilifying and has vilified for quite some time many nonprofits, specifically progressive ones, and it is the thoughts of some of the most powerful people that all nonprofits are corrupt and are misusing funds. That message eventually sneaks into the zeitgeist of a rising generation of like, oh, they know that's just part of the bureaucratic apparatus. It's the nonprofit industry complex. You're like, okay, but if the answer is like do nothing, then we're in a bad place, I'd say. And then the other sort of sub narrative in my mind is around if those, under 45, what percent of them have given to an individual, pointing toward, do they consider now the one-to-one giving, the GoFundMe, or the, giving to, individual family members in need? Is that the new charity of choice?
Yeah, George, I think that's really interesting. I'd be interested if we were able to kind of dive into those crosstabs a little bit more, see if we got that granularity there, just for shifts in giving broadly. But I think you're right. Also be really interesting to see if stock market fluctuations impact giving. I'd be interested to see, again, once those numbers come out in the summer, if there was any kind of big swings abnormally between Q4 last year and Q1 this year, with just, quite
But
frankly,
it's
greater uncertainty
normalizing
now.
to under 45, right? So it, as a control, like everyone is experiencing the market. And so disproportionately under
That's
45
fair.
is giving less. So we're in the same conditions.
Right.
Another
So it's a
thought
cultural shift. Yeah.
is that if you look at the trend of, frankly, religion and people that identify as religious is decreasing and decreasing over time. And one of the things that I know in church, in religion, in conversation is this practice of generosity. So how is this generation being introduced to generosity? Because previously it was in large part the role of religion and religious teachers to bring that part of the education. I mean, it's certainly not coming from school or from college, unless it is obviously give to your alumni association. So, I think there might be not this generosity, just a generosity crisis, but the generosity education lack going on there.
Yeah. No, George, I agree. And I think it doesn't help that we have a presidential administration that says, why should we fund malaria interventions in Africa? They don't, I think that those meta narratives are permeating to an extent also, those
Yeah.
isolationist narratives.
Yeah. And so it's instead of me, we, community, state, country, international, caring about people, it's like if I'm gonna like reduce it down to like how am I getting mine, and that's where my fence ends. It's interesting, I think about it also just as a dad, how I'm thinking of generosity comes back to we have my little girl gets an allowance, but we divide it up into the spend, save, give or share, and she's like allocates it, and then we're choosing like, all right, how are you going to manage these things? But this is still a whole new generation coming, so I think there may be this sort of generosity education gap that we're going to move through.
Yeah.
All right, Nick, we have jokes.
Let's do it, George. We got jokes galore. George, I have a question for you. How do you make a fundraiser for the earth?
I don't know, make it big.
You plan it.
That is
Planet.
awful. Yeah, no, the whole earth there.
Yep. Pretty bad.
All
George, do
right,
you have a joke?
I do, because we're now doing dueling jokes, because why do one when two is more? So again, vote for your favorite, and we won't take that into consideration in creating the next one, but do that anyway. I have a question for you. How much do solar panels on your roof cost?
I don't know.
Nothing. They're on the house. It's on the house, man.
Man. Nope. I'm done.
I'm out.
I'm out.
All right,
Peace.
Nick.
All right. See you, George.
See you guys.